Okay, hello and welcome to our Fraternity and Sorority Life Advisors series. This is our fourth conversation with our topic of mental health for our series tonight. For our first time joiners, or if you do not know who I am, my name is Matt Greer, and I serve as the program coordinator for Fraternity and Sorority Life within the Office of Student Activities at Temple University. And I'll turn it over to Nikia.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikia Jefferson, our Assistant Director for Fraternity and Sorority Life.
So today we have two panelists that are joining us for our conversation again this week. We are super excited to have them, and I will kick off with our introductions. So first off, we have Dr. Zachary E. Shirley, who serves as the Director of the Center for Fraternity and Sorority Life at the University of North Texas, with oversight of the staffing, budgetary, and programmatic efforts for the fraternity and sorority community. As a student affairs practitioner for more than 10 years, Dr. Shirley has worked in both professional and volunteer capacities with a wide array of fraternity and sorority communities across the country. Dr. Shirley has previous experience from Texas Women's University, the University of Texas at Dallas, Texas A&M University Conference, the University of Cincinnati, and most recently, Indiana University Bloomington, where he served as the Assistant Dean of Sorority and Fraternity Life. Dr. Shirley graduated with his Bachelor's of Science degree from Paul Quinn College, his Master's of Science degree from Texas A&M University Conference, and his Doctorate of Education degree from the University of North Texas. His dissertation examines declining participation in fraternities and sororities and factors that led to students choosing to forego that experience in light of other campus involvement opportunities at a single institution. Dr. Shirley is passionate about serving as a voice for all students, especially those students who identify as minorities at their universities and within their communities. Dr. Shirley enjoys spending time getting to know students and learning about their personal journey, and strives to create spaces for all students to develop and thrive, no matter their background or experiences. Holding affiliation with Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated and the Fraternal Organization of Prince Hall Masonry, Dr. Shirley is an avid proponent of community engagement and working to better the environment of those around him. So welcome, Dr. Shirley. Second, we have Kenya Crawford. Kenya is a licensed psychotherapist in a private practice specializing in working with people of color and LGBTQ people navigating traumas, depression, anxiety, and relationships, both monogamous and consensual non-monogamy. As a Black queer woman, Kenya approaches her counseling from an anti-racist and anti-oppressive lens, aimed towards creating a collaborative and authentic space to foster radical, holistic healing for clients. In conjunction with her work as a therapist, Kenya serves as a faculty member in the Department of Counseling and Clinical Psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University. Kenya is also the co-founder of the On the Mend, which offers an array of healing courses specifically catered to the people of color and LGBTQ folk. These courses provide powerful skills learned in therapy at a lower cost without the long wait. Learn more about her on IG at onthemend.co. In addition to her clinical work, Kenya serves as a consultant on mental health, sexuality, gender, and anti-racist diversity, equity, and inclusion, providing intersectional knowledge with agencies, schools, and corporations. By drawing on practitioner, research, and advocate model, Kenya hopes to foster a space for dialogue where people can learn, grow, and various forms of oppression. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today on this super critical topic of mental health that kind of brings our topics together as an intersectional point for our past conversations that we have had as well. So the first kind of question that we're going to jump into and gain some perspective on is, what do you believe the role of fraternity and sorority plays in addressing mental health concerns among college students?
So first of all, thank you all for joining Kenya and I on this evening. Definitely excited to tackle this topic with her. I'm going to try to add to the conversation. She's that expert, but
cut it out. We're not doing that. We're not starting off like this already.
I'm gonna gas you up, sis. So I, having worked with fraternities and sororities for a while, and knowing the strong affinity that students have towards our organizations, right? We are one of the two largest affinity groups on any campus. You have your athletes and you have your fraternity and sorority life community. And so the role that we play in addressing mental health concerns and advocating for mental health assistance for our students is large because of the fact that we have such a large and diverse membership, right? There's constant attention on fraternity and sorority life organizations, whether it's by the institution, through the media, through those individuals who are wanting to affiliate with our experience. And so that adds a lot of pressure to the membership within our organizations. It adds a lot of pressure to the individual students who want to join our organizations. You know, far too often there are concerns about, am I pretty enough? Am I rich enough? Am I handsome enough? Am I affluent enough? Am I involved enough? Am I enough? And so if we are not careful as fraternity and sorority life organizations, we can perpetuate a lot of that mental harm that happens to our students. And so it is incumbent upon us to be able to address those concerns and have honest conversations with our members, whether it be advisors to the members or members amongst themselves as peer groups, to do a temperature check, right, of where that mental health is. College students are coming to our campuses these days with far more mental health concerns than I know I went to college with, or a lot of the advisors who are on the call went to college with. And maybe it was just, we didn't have a name for it, right? Like we just thought we were stressed. But okay, we could be stressed, however, we can be bipolar. We can have generalized anxiety disorder. We can have a myriad of other things that are now having names attached to them. And then when we add the pressures of being an 18 to 21-year-old, probably far away from home, probably a first generation college student, probably taking a tough major, by the way, or probably struggling with sexuality. And by the way, I want to join a fraternity or sorority. Knowing how stressful the membership intake and recruitment process is already, we have a responsibility, if we talk about brotherhood and sisterhood and siblinghood, to really tackle these issues and help our members out in not only figuring out what these mental health concerns may be, but also normalizing the fact that it's okay to have these concerns. Mm-hmm. But now how do we manage them?
Mm-hmm. You know, I really love what you just shared, Dr. Shirley, around this idea and question of, am I enough? Right. And I think for a lot of students, this question around perfectionism and this constant critique that is consistently present is what's leading to this increase in symptoms of anxiety and depression. And to build off of something else that you mentioned, you know, it's not so much that these experiences of mental illness and struggles with mental health weren't present. We just didn't have a name for them. Right, we called them stressed, or we called it something else, opposed to now we have the language and more tools and more resources to be able to label them in various ways. So to go back to the original question around, you know, what is our role in incorporating mental health and having this conversation, I think it's important that mental health is institutionalized as a value, as a part of the consistent conversation, not something that is only in response to a traumatic event, right? Like this thing occurred with this organization, so now let's have a mental health month or a mental health week. What would it look like for us to institutionalize mental wellness as a value of these various organizations in the way that we communicate, in the way that we name expectations of some of these students? How are we actually exploring and noticing shifts and changes in one's mental health and creating shifts and changes in our organization to meet that actual need, opposed to this expectation of, well, we're in college, everyone's stressed, let's just brush it off. When in reality, that can be so harmful and dismissive of one's mental illness and or mental wellness.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to kick this off. I think you both have illustrated how like this fraternity story life just contributes to these things that are already happening. And so how can our organizations add in this value, this thought as we're moving through our general operations? You know, how do we have this idea that we have students, we have members that are coming in on a spectrum of mental health, and we as an organization can do and should do something to help manage that, let alone try not to add to it.
So I think that you hit a nail on the head, Nikia. We are a microcosm of the greater macrocosm of a college or a university. We are oftentimes, depending upon the size of the campus, a small city within a large, environment. So we normalize a lot of our own behaviors as fraternity and sorority organizations. We create a lot of our own social rules and hierarchies as fraternity and sorority organizations, or that tier system that tends to exist at a number of campuses. And so, but I think the difference with us is that we have the people power to be able to tap into a lot of resources that unaffiliated students don't necessarily have. But are we doing our due diligence in addressing those, or are we just trying to brush things off? And I think that with all of the things that are occurring now, the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID-19, it's an election year. In addition to, I have to navigate my life now through a virtual classroom for the fall semester. And we thought this was going away, but it's probably not going away for a while, if ever. How all these things compound on top of each other, and what are we doing to provide resources to our students to be able to say, I can depend on my fraternity or sorority chapter to offer me the crucial help that I need, not just regulations on recruitment or membership intake and date parties and new member presentations, right? Like, we have the mechanism as these national, international organizations to provide this assistance to our students. And the beautiful thing is we have mental health experts within our own organizations, or organizations who are in close proximity to us. So there's really no reason that we shouldn't be doing the work if there are organizations who are not.
And I think when we're naming, having this conversation around the resources that are present, right? We have CAPS on campus. We have so many people that are willing to show up and provide this resource and be there for people. And there's this large gap of students not going to CAPS, right? Not getting that resource, not going to the free events that are present. And I think we really need to step back and have a conversation around the impacts of shame and stigma and how that is actually keeping people from that space, because they may feel like that space is not built for them or that space isn't for them. In my work with predominantly folk of color, I frequently have this conversation of people saying, well, therapy is not for me, right? Therapy is not for Black folk, therapy is not for folk of color. And I have to, pause them for a second and realize that, healing can be decolonized. And I think when we think about healing in this traditional one-on-one, space, it's not understood in the same way amongst Black communities. But when I say, when we all get together and we build that community, or we get our family together and we're sharing some concerns, or maybe you're speaking with a pastor or someone in your family or your life, that space can be a therapeutic space. And that is how we've gained healing before. But let's go a little bit deeper with that. Let's go explore that maybe with a trained professional who can actually provide you with those tools and skills, and maybe even look like you, right? Maybe be able to understand your life in similar ways, or your experience in similar ways. So I think the impacts of shame and stigma have been so present in our desires to really show up and provide mental health services for folk. I think when we're also trying to incorporate more students to have this conversation or incorporate mental wellness, I think we also need to understand that we have to be transparent and vulnerable as well as to where we're coming from with this desire, not pathologizing that one person that seems to be struggling, but really showing up for all folk who are experiencing and building that relationship with their mental wellness. So, there's multiple facets here that we need to continue to kind of bring into the space, because what I really love what you said, Zach, around this is a microcosm, right? We are our own little community, and we need to be able to support each other in this space.
So Kenya, in our community, we have probably just over 2,000 members community-wide. Our chapters range from 1 to over 200 members, right? So every single chapter's dynamic and the way that they, let's say, approach brotherhood or sisterhood is different. And I know in some of our past conversations with student leaders around mental health, it is such an important topic among students that for different reasons we're not talking about within these spaces that are supposed to be safe, right? It's supposed to feel like family. And so just to quote some of our students, I have my MPHC members who are like, we don't talk about this stuff. Like, mental health is not on the table for discussion. I come from a family where we don't have these types of conversations. On to our Pan-Hellenic chapters, who leaders have shared, like, I'm gonna be honest, it's impossible to feel close enough with 200 women to have this conversation, despite me knowing that this is where I probably should be able to. How do we help, we as advisors, support pushing back on some of those narratives and really being able to raise these conversations so that students can also kind of peel some layers back to get to the point where we're sharing resources among each other?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I'm going to kind of answer the latter part first, when you're talking about some of the organizations that are much larger, right? And that additional stigma that is present, because there's also this, public face of it, right? If I'm sharing my struggles with mental health with 2,000 people, that's 2,000 people that might judge me, that might critique me, that might ostracize me, that might isolate me. There's this additional pressure that's present, right? So I think when we're talking about mental health in larger groups of folks, something that I like to share with my clients is that you don't gotta share your business to everybody. And that's okay, right? Just because all of these, individuals in this organization are your brothers or your sisters, that doesn't mean that you need to share your struggles with mental health with everyone. But when we're talking about trying to get to all of those folk, I think it's important to recognize that even though they may be in the same organization, those needs are going to be different. And we need to give space for that and hold compassion for that and explore and recognize that our desires to help may be present, but we may still fail in that process because these advisors are not trained clinicians. And it's really important to recognize where your limits are and where your boundaries are as you're supporting some of your students, and recognize, I have a bundle of resources that I can provide you and connect you with, because maybe I'm getting to a point where this isn't my expertise, right? This isn't where I really show up, and this is where I really have an understanding of how to best support you. Does that help answer your question?
It does. So I would then kick it to Zach and ask, for our advisors who maybe have been faced with a student disclosing a concern or divulging some of their mental health challenges with mental health, how have maybe you responded as an advisor, and when have you reached that point of my expertise ends and I need to focus more on getting those resources to the student? Like, what's that balance?
So the balance for me is, if I'm not able to comfortably talk through it without stuttering or saying, like, it's all about bandwidth for me. If I don't have the bandwidth, and I know I don't have the bandwidth to take on a mental health conversation versus all right, I'm just having a tough day. I think that we're all savvy enough in our advising skills in our adulthood to be able to say, all right, let's differentiate Matt from having a tough day versus, okay, Matt is struggling through some really tough things. And I tend to be very outright with the student when they come to me, and I ask them, like, is this something that is keeping you from getting out of bed every day, going to class? Are you struggling to communicate this with the people who you feel like you should be able to communicate this the most with? Your family, your fraternity brothers, your sorority sisters. your pledge class, your line brothers, your line sisters. Like, if it gets to that point and you can't tap into the people who you trust and love the most, then it might be time for you to talk to someone who has an LPC or has professional credentials behind this. And as much as I want to be it because I love and adore you, I'm not it, but I will refer, and I will walk you over there. I've walked many a student over to the Counseling and Psychological Services Center because of the fact that also I think that what we can do very well as advisors is be that shoulder that they lean on and that person that they can trust. I don't have the academic or professional credentials to be able to talk you through this, but I'm a human being who loves and cares about you as a member of our community or a member of this chapter. And I will be there for you through those emotional moments, you know, or if you need someone to talk to, you know, you pop in between classes, or you feel like you got to come talk to me and skip class because you can't make it through class. All right, let's do that. But let's also let's make a deal with one another that, you know, I'm going to hold on my end of the agreement and be there for you regardless. And I hate to say agreement because that's just what we do. It's our job and we love to do it. But, you know, there are people who care about you, whomever this student is. And so we want you to get the help and assistance that you need. And so understanding and being able to gauge what is within your wheelhouse versus what is outside of your bandwidth, I think has been my gauge to allow me to be able to say, all right, it's time for us to have this conversation. I've also asked the student very outright, are you comfortable with talking to someone over in CAPS? If I walk you over there, I can't sit in the session with you, but I can sit outside. Would you be comfortable if you knew I was right outside the door in the lobby? You know, so showing that culture of care, right, of saying, I will take this step with you, but then there's the step that takes a lot of courage that you have to take by yourself and go in here and speak with this person. But I'm right outside.
You'd be surprised how frequently that happens, Zach, where there is that supportive person that is walking them to the therapeutic space for the first time. So it definitely helps to have that support system outside to say, you know, I'll wait out here for the hour and I'll be here once you're done. So I'm happy to hear that you're using yourself in that way.
Oh yeah, I have told many a counselor, this is my baby right here. So I know I can't go in, but I'm gonna be right out here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's obviously one successful strategy that has worked for you. Are there any other potential successful strategies that you have seen or experienced that help to kind of create that culture of care within the chapters itself and really foster the building of relationship to feel comfortable to share more, to show that support?
So I will also say this, and this is something that I, as a fraternity sorority campus-based professional, have had to be very careful with. And I've worked with our care team and our Dean of Students office, but, you know, having conversations with chapter advisors. Because again, we talk about a student's academic record. And as university employees, we have to be mindful of FERPA. However, in those instances where I have felt that, okay, I need to kick this up, not only take this student over to CAPS and sit with him or her or them, but also reach out to this chapter advisor and say, hey, you know, XYZ student is struggling with this and this is what they shared with me. And this is what I'm able to share with you. However, as a chapter advisor, I not only want you to be aware, but I think you need to be aware and see what resources you have from your advisory council or your international headquarters or your regional people to also be able to help this student out. Because I think the beautiful thing between chapter advisors and campus-based professionals is that we both have the same needs. We both want the same thing. We want the betterment of this experience for our students. We go about it in different ways, oftentimes, but if there's a student who is struggling with mental health concerns, as responsible advisors on either side, we need to be in communication with each other to be able to show the student that they have the support, especially if they feel like, you know, from a cultural standpoint, they can't talk to mom and dad, or feel like they don't talk about it in their culture. Like, we know that men from Black and brown communities and Asian identifying communities will not talk about mental health concerns because we're just supposed to man up and tough it out, you know. But if we build that rapport with them and they are able to open that up to us, then we can tap into to our respective chapter advisors and say, all right, this is what this individual is struggling with. How can we help them, knowing that they probably won't go home and have this conversation?
Something I'd like to offer to advisors and to this conversation in general, as it relates to two areas of this experience, I think we are trying to do a better job at weaving mental health, or those mental health moments, into this world. So those would be like our academic performance, and then student conduct. So in both of those spaces, in working with our chapter leadership, you know, I can sit with the chapter president and say, like, hey, who are we surprised about their performance this semester? Are there things that we already know happen? Or, you know, what's our next steps versus just the blanket academic probation, right? Like, what else are we discussing among our chapter members to really get to root cause? Same thing with conduct. You know, are we just sending people to standards board because they posted something on Instagram that they weren't supposed to, and that doesn't meet chapter expectation? Or are we really digging in and saying, hey, actually, Paula, you're not supposed to do X, but let's talk about why you were doing that to begin with, right? Like, how are we really starting those conversations to really take advantage of the moments as they show face, and not just brush them to the side and talk blanketly about, you know, the resources that are available to students. Are there any other maybe signs that advisors might see, just again, in working with the students organically, that could be other types of moments that they pick up on negative behavior or things that are different, abnormal is not the right word, but different than our typical chapter and member to member interactions?
I love what you just mentioned around that curiosity piece, right? I'm going to explore what was happening for this person before just throwing a probation at them. And I think that part is so important, because what may happen is the relationship you have with that individual could be harmed by you just saying, okay, I'm just going to put you on academic probation because of this, right? Instead of moving in with a sense of curiosity and care and compassion and saying, you know, I'm noticing this really large shift happening for you. What may have led to this? Because things don't just happen out of nowhere, right? Behaviors don't shift that abruptly out of nowhere. So how can you actually, as an advisor, show up and be that supportive person? I think, you know, some other things to be mindful of, to look out for, is, you know, any change in behavior that is drastic from what you know of the student, whether that is, you know, a lack of presence, a lack of interest in certain activities that they tended to enjoy before, any isolation that you're noticing, any change in affect or demeanor, are typically pretty, you know, good signs of us recognizing a shift and change in one's mental health.
So, Nikia, you said something very crucial that I have long since said applies to not only FSAs on campus, but chapter advisors as well. We are expected, whether real or imagined, to monitor the behaviors of upwards of 2,000, 3,000 students, 200, 250 students in a chapter, as one or two or three people. That is not humanly possible. And so I have long since said that chapter advisors with respective fraternities and sorority chapters are overworked and under-resourced. How can we have a Panhellenic advisor, for instance, who is able to monitor the behaviors and the emotions of upwards of 200 women when she may not even know all of their names? And then when something happens, well, you're the advisor, you should have known. That's not fair to her. Similarly, our culturally based organizations. Sure, we have smaller chapters. However, I think that there's a different type of attention that needs to be paid because, you may have 2 or 3 members who outwardly talk about their mental health concerns, but then you have 5 or 6 who bury it until it's too late. And so that goes back to the fact that advisors aren't necessarily trained to recognize these signs. Like, I'm pretty sure Kenya can see something in the nonverbals of a student that the other 3 of us won't be even able to see. And we haven't been trained in that. Or some of it we've been trained in, but also we're like, all right, not only are we trained in that, but we're trained in, well, we got to get the risk management documents in, and then you got to get student org registration in, and oh, by the way, your intake paperwork, and then oh, by the way, your social event paperwork. So we've got so many other things that have us high wired, where somebody like Kenya, who's very specialized in this, can probably pick up in 10 minutes like, that body language is all the way off. We're going to think that you're just mad at us because we made you turn in a piece of paperwork. So I feel like that there needs to be, a recommendation somewhere closely down the line where on each advisory board, if possible, there is a member of the organization who has a background as an LPC or a social worker or something along those lines. Because if you have an advisory board and one person has that experience, they'll be able to help the other advisors along the way and be able to say, all right, well, Mackenzie actually seemed to be struggling through this. Everybody else probably didn't see it, but this person saw it.
And I think that goes back to my original point in the beginning, right, around institutionalizing mental health, right? If the advisors are already set up to not witness and acknowledge and incorporate mental health, why would the students? So how can the organizations, how can advisors actually advocate towards what you just mentioned and incorporating mental health as a value of this community and not merely a reactionary item or reactionary conversation in the community?
And I think specifically at Temple, our students are asking for smaller spaces to have these conversations. So we, our monthly critical conversation isn't going to cut it at the community level where, there's over 300 people in the room and we're trying to normalize conversations about mental health. Like, that's not a good starting point. I think particularly in the remote virtual space that we've been afforded this semester, it offers some really cool opportunities to reach back and utilize our chapter lineage, our alumni members whom are likely doing this work, and really bringing them back into the experience, whether that's for our advisors' benefit, as Zach mentioned, or to have these smaller conversations with our students. I think that's a really good option and way to utilize this next semester while we're online. Greater access to people.
So I think that also, based off of some of the conversation that we just had, relates to kind of my next thought of knowing that our advisors are volunteer positions. How do they maintain their own mental health while supporting students, knowing that this is just something I do because I'm passionate about it and not necessarily, my day-to-day job too?
So brother, sister, whomever is hearing the sound of my voice, it goes back to bandwidth, right? I am both a campus-based fraternity sorority professional and I am a chapter advisor. something is wrong with me. I don't need to do both. However, I do it, to Matt's point, because I love it. However, I also think that we need to be able to learn how to create those boundaries for our own mental health. A number of advisors have partners, have children, have their own stressful careers, and they do this advisory role and not get paid for it because they love the fraternity, the sorority. It's their undergraduate chapter. However, mental health concerns in individuals outside of college, very real as well. You know, you're juggling multiple identities, and Ken can definitely touch more on it than I can. But for me, it is understanding the fact that, you know, I have all of these other competing priorities going on, and I'm going to make time for these young men, and I have to make time for my job. However, knowing when I need to unplug, you know, or knowing when I need to lean on other members of my advisory committee to hopefully tap in, and then ultimately knowing when it's time for me to walk away. Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated will not implode if one day I decide not to be a collegiate chapter advisor. The organization will go on without us. And if we're using the organization to fill a void in our lives, we need to go to therapy for that. Because there should be other things that bring us joy, you know, or there should be other volunteer opportunities that we can tap into to bring us joy. But I really think that it's one, listening to yourself, listening to your heart, your body, your mind. Like, does this hour and a half to 2 hour chapter meeting with these collegiate members exhaust you or rejuvenate you? At the beginning, it probably rejuvenates, but after a couple of years, it probably exhausts. It may be time to take a step away, because then you're not being your best self for these students. Does showing up to these philanthropy events or these new member presentations or these community service or these undergraduate retreats or all of these other things, in addition to what your kids have going on, what your partner has going on, what your job has going on, what you want to have going on for yourself, is that draining? If it is, step away. And it's okay to step away. And I say that because we need to normalize making it okay to say, you know what? I gave my service, but I have my own life to live.
I really love that piece, because I think what you're really calling attention to is recognizing how boundaries can actually be used as a way to support and protect the needs that we have. So a technique that sometimes I do with clients that are like in 50 million things at once, I pull them back and we have a conversation around what their values are and what activities and what roles and what, you know, parts of their lives are actually aligning to that value. And sometimes we realize that they're doing things that they don't actually value. They're just doing it because of guilt, right? Because if I don't do this, will this implode, right? Will this completely fall apart? And something I frequently share with my clients is that if you are the only person that can potentially do this role, there is another way that you should be compensated or valued for this. But clearly that's not happening. So like you mentioned, Dr. Shirley, this won't implode if I stop engaging in it. And if you were set up to a space where it will implode, you weren't set up for success in the first place. So what's the purpose of you staying in this role if in no way were you actually set up to be empowered or set up to enjoy and protect all of your needs in this space? So I would absolutely say boundaries is the way to go. And boundaries is not a space of saying no to other people, but actually saying yes to yourself, saying yes to your needs, saying yes to what you need to survive and thrive in this world, not just survive, because we've created this idea of, you know, grind culture, we got to keep going, when in reality that's actually a stemmet of capitalism and white supremacy and how that is showing up in your actions of life. So how can we actually pull yourself back from that to engage in more of your needs and your values?
One of our advisors jumped in and just talking through the use of it, more of an advisory committee. So not taking on the burden of being the sole chapter advisor where all of the responsibilities fall on you. There's this shared responsibility and likely better transition as you need to, take care of self, whether that's permanently or situation to situation. I think that's an excellent point and something that Matt and I also try to advocate chapters to do, that there is value in having that much more support in advisory capacity. I was thinking even also though, that each advisor, as you mentioned, both of you mentioned, have to set boundaries for themselves. And Kenya, you said, we don't have to share everything that's going on with us, with everyone. But I do think there's a certain level of vulnerability that advisors also have to have with their members, right? And being willing to share some of what's going on so that as you need to take time away, as you need to modify schedule, as you need to say, honestly, that's just not going to work, you have that human level conversation with the students, that they can also see you beyond your title as advisor. They see you as a whole being with other priorities. And so I think that's really important for our advisors to consider and to employ as we go into this new year, especially. We talked about it in the context of, what are all the modifications we need to make because of COVID, right? Like, we're not meeting in person. If there's a particular thing that has to happen in person, are you forced to be there? Is your comfort level there? How do you have that conversation with students? I had a really hard conversation this summer with a student in the midst of all of the racial injustice. It was a really hard week. And we don't, despite our full-time professionals working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, it was a Saturday. I have a lot of conversations with students on a Saturday, and I was like, honestly, I can't today, because guess what? I don't get to call in Black on Monday, and it's feeling really hard today, right? To just be, let alone have these conversations from a chapter lens, from a community lens, just not today. And that takes a level of trust and relationship building to own that. But we need to get to a point where we can have those conversations with our student leaders, that they can, in turn take care of us so that we can continue to be full and pour back into them. So I'm super excited that we got to have this conversation as we wrap up our summer series for advisors, because I think the last couple topics have been hard, to say the least. We talked about sexual violence. We talked about, again, going back into this academic year, we've talked about social justice, and our advisors are put in a position where they're expected to be this catch-all. And they're expected to be experts on everything and have their hand in everything. And it's impossible. Like, it is impossible. I'll go ahead and say that we ask a lot of you all. And while I do not accept anyone quitting this year, we certainly, don't have even an inkling what all you're carrying in addition to the work that you're doing alongside of us. So I appreciate the work that our advisors do. It is a thankless job, but certainly also advocate for self-care, and not as a buzzword, as a practice that for all of us, but especially for our advising teams to keep in mind.
I also, just thinking through these past conversations, knowing that, our students have probably been a little bit more engaged this summer than they have been in the past. So knowing that we don't know what the ripple effects of some of those things will be as we enter into the fall semester. Are they going to be more checked out, or are they going to continue to check in throughout? And thinking through what that strategy for checking in is, and how do we create that culture of care as we kind of keep going back to within our chapter. I know one of the successful things that some of the Panelists chapters were just doing phone trees, right? Like, I don't want a text message. Like, I want to physically hear your voice on the phone and check in to make sure that you're okay. how do we create, some of those environments as members that show that we value you as a person, and we want to check in and see that this membership means something, and it's not just something that I'm a part of for the time frame that I'm in college, but this is lifelong friendships that we have developed. And I think as we, are navigating the fall semester, thinking through like, what does this now mean that we, should kind of look into and adapt to, in order to focus in on mental health, knowing that it's not going to be the traditional semester itself. So I guess in the context of not having that personal connection, any recommendations or thoughts for what ways we can address or feel comfortable with mental health in a more virtual setting?
The first thing that came to mind, I've gotten this question a lot when I shifted from in-person sessions to all virtual. A lot of folk were asking me, are clients still showing up? Are they still present? Are they still engaged? And I've actually seen the complete opposite. I was expecting them not to be engaged, but I think similar to your point of this summer, you've been seeing so much more engagement. I think the virtual world is really working well and allowing people to have access to so much because they don't have to go anywhere, they don't have to commute anywhere. But when we're talking specifically about mental health, what I've been noticing is that people are willing to have harder conversations or deeper conversations because they're at home. They're in a space where they feel safe already, where they feel comfortable to maybe go deeper and be a little bit more vulnerable and share maybe some pieces of themselves that it was a little difficult for them to share in person because they were adopting your energy and adopting your body language and recognizing that here goes this person right across from me that may have this very large reaction. Where with the virtual world, if you have a reaction I don't like, at any point I can press that leave button. Right? I don't have to be in your office anymore. I don't have to be in your classroom anymore. So I've actually seen a really interesting shift with my work and people going much deeper. So I think continuing to recognize that virtual has provided so much accessibility for folk to have this conversation around mental health. I think we have to continue to institutionalize it as a conversation that is continuously being had, not one that's only in response or reactionary to a trauma that has been occurred. Also understanding your own, bandwidth that has been mentioned already, your own boundaries, your own needs, and recognizing that sometimes I don't have the capacity that Saturday, but I got you Tuesday at 2. And that's okay to be able to say yes to yourself because saying yes to you is allowing you to continue to show up for your students later down the line and decreasing that likelihood of your relationship with burnout.
I mean, Kenya said everything that needed to be said. But I really love that aspect of saying, all right, Tuesday at 2, I got you. Because I used to be the same way, Nikia. I used to be like, oh, it's Friday at 11:17 p.m. My student needs me. No, I need me. And I have gotten to a point in my career, 15 years doing this and other institutions and having advice and all of these other things, realizing the fact that in order for me to be my best self for our students and for our advisors, I need to be a little selfish with my after 5 time or my weekend time, because if I don't have it to give and I'm giving you what's left of me, resentment may ensue after that. The thing about having I'm drinking my water. I'm on my health kick. I'm almost 40, so it's time for me to be on that health kick. But if we think about this cup being full, right? All of the fullness is for me. The overflow is for everyone else. I need my cup to stay full the entire time because if it diminishes any, then I diminish. Now, I don't mind pouring the Brita pitcher in here until it overflows, and then whoever needs to catch it can catch it around the brim. But I used to pour from the cup and empty the cup. And then at the end of the day, I'm left with an empty cup. I think that what we do as advisors, whether it is campus-based advisors or chapter advisors, we come in and we are a sponge, right? Like everybody gets to pour their problems into us and we expand. They leave our offices or our conversations feeling great. Oh my God, you've helped me so much. But when you do that 8 hours a day, so let's say you have a student every hour, you have 8 hours of problems, issues, concerns, plus your own, plus your partners, plus your kids, plus your job. And what are you doing to expel all of that? Everybody else gets to leave and be fine. You have the weight of the world on you. I refuse to do that in my life now. And I would encourage us all as advisors to refuse to do that as well. You know, I refuse to have someone else be the collateral damage in my inner war against myself because I chose not to take care of myself. And that's what I think, transferring that back to our students, we have to teach them the same things. You also don't have to take on the world's problem. And being okay and, again, normalizing that mentality.
I love that. I would, and I think working remotely has helped us better prioritize things, right? Like when we bring other people into our world, I think fraternity sorority is this like big mystery that like you either drink the Kool-Aid or you don't. And so drinking the Kool-Aid for so long, I think, you know, as my partner has seen this world, he is like, what are y'all talking about? Like what, like, are y'all really arguing? Like, we got to stop arguing about t-shirts and we got to stop arguing about, you know, the petty aspects of this experience. Because as Zach said, like when you really pull back and think about it and think about the things that fuel you, the things that we really value in this experience is typically not the stuff that we spend the most time talking about. I think that's so important as advisors to also help our students get that. You know, how do we give people back their time? How do we use our time that we do have together to better these experiences for each other? One of the things that our student leaders have figured out this summer is that every meeting doesn't have to be an hour. It's been so beautiful. Every meeting does not have to be an hour. Every meeting doesn't have to start at 8 p.m. Because like we cater to student schedule, but also like student, you might not want to work at 8 p.m. Shout out to MPHC who is meeting at noon during my working hours this academic year. So, you know, I would just challenge our advisors to, again, continue to ask for what you need from this experience. I think that there's a way that you can maintain your commitment while maintaining, as Zach said, your commitment to yourself. And, you know, as we continue our conversations, our necessary conversations with students around mental health, knowing, again, you're a part of that journey, you're a part of that community as we work and talk through all of these critical conversations.
Yeah, and I think too, how do we, you know, take mental health out of the caveat of just mental health and look at general well-being, right? Like, there is parts of physical well-being, emotional well-being, intellectual well-being, social well-being, so many different things that go into who we are as people, that if we just start incorporating some new things to focus on how do we put that well-being first and allow us to, you know, do some of that things. I reflect back to a conference that I went to last summer and facilitated for, but they took intentional wellness breaks. So like, how do we, like in the middle of our facilitation, like here's our first 20 minutes, cool, we're going to do some like intentional breathing and get a cat apparently in the middle of our screen. But we're going to do some intentional breathing that is written into the curriculum to just help us stay focused on what we're doing. And then we're going to jump back into the curriculum. Maybe this time it's just like that stretch break, right? But like, how do we intentionally write some of our well-being into the things that we're doing? If we know we're having a hard chapter meeting, maybe we start off with like, let's do some highs and like focus on what's good. Or let's take a break and, you know, we're going to need to take a stretch, or just like focus in on like, you know, why do we need to have this conversation, and why is it important, instead of just like, oh my God, we're getting badgered with all of the bad. So really focusing in on, you know, that well-being piece. But I also want to be cognizant of time. So as we are rounding to that 7 o'clock hour, any final thoughts or things that you wanted to bring up and did not get the chance to, as we are closing out our mental health conversation of our advisor series?
So I would just say, the word that I've been using ever since this has happened is grace, and again, bandwidth. Not only give your students grace, but give yourselves grace. Shameless plug to Matt and Nikia, give your fraternity sorority life advisors grace, because we are trying. There are answers that we don't have, or if we have them, they change probably next week. And what we gave you last week is probably not applicable. And it's the same with our organizations, right? Our respective national, international organizations. Everybody's trying to figure this out. And so give it grace, but also let's not hide from the fact that this could be, we still have people who want to be a part of this experience. And we still have people who want to affiliate with our organizations. And let's try to make that the best experience for them. However, also understanding what's in the bandwidth of our collegiates, what's in the bandwidth of us as advisors, and knowing that nobody has any of the answers. And if we all say we got the answer, they're all like 30 different answers. And who's to say that that answer is correct? So just giving each other and ourselves the grace and understanding what our bandwidth is to what we can take on. I've taken off every Friday since June. Every single Friday, and my associate vice president knows, expect that PTO request for these Fridays. And she has approved them, you know? I mean, because you have to understand what that culture of care for yourself means. And I just go on hikes by myself or with friends, but you know, breathe in some fresh air. We're all working from home. We're staying indoors. We probably want to murder people who we live with. Or conversely, we're by ourselves and we're lonely. You know, and so figuring out how to navigate both of those. But take care of yourself.
And I think to piggyback off of that, if there's one thing that I've learned in today's panel is recognizing that advisors hold so many roles and responsibilities. And I think it's imperative that we understand that we can't be perfect at everything at the same time. It's important to show up to one role or one relationship and maybe centering that first, or centering that in that present moment, but recognizing I may be a good advisor today, but I may be a not so good advisor tomorrow because I have something else to call attention to, or I have, you know, another meeting to call attention to, and that's okay. You're not expected to be perfect at everything every day, and giving ourselves that grace and recognizing and honoring our bandwidth in the ways that it shows up for us is what's going to lead to that overall mental wellness.
I will tell y'all, I have a quote in my office, and it's written on my whiteboard, and my students and my staff see it every time they come in. Well, I'll write it on my dry erase board when I'm feeling this way, and they'll know, okay, all right, this is where Zach is. And it's literally a quote that says, I don't have the bandwidth to take this on. So they think very carefully about what it is they're about to bring to me, because I'm very honest in the fact of some days, to Kenya's point, great, I'm gonna go and we're gonna knock all this out. All of it's gonna be great. At 5, I'm gonna be exhausted, but it's going to be great. But then there are some days where I'm like, I don't have the bandwidth to take this on. So let's be mindful of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for being a part of this panel. As a reminder for our advisors, we do have our leadership retreat on Sunday. So we hope to see you all there. It is from 10 to 12 and then again from 1 to 3 in order to give you that little lunch break in between. We will be talking through what the potential programming aspects of the fall semester look like, as well as hear from some campus administration about healthy practices and also diving a little bit deeper into our new accreditation process as well. So we look forward to seeing you all on Sunday and diving in a little bit deeper for those conversations. But I thank you all for taking part in this series and being active participants in fostering these conversations and really just supporting our students, knowing that these are critical conversations. And I know that it is cliche because it's the name of the program we use, but these really are critical conversations that we need to have if we want to continue to operate as fraternities and sororities and really show why we matter and why we should continue to exist, because we are leading the charge in having these conversations as organizations. So I thank you for taking part and look forward to seeing all of you on Sunday for our retreat. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks, everyone.